From time immemorial, the sovereign nations have inhabited, protected, and preserved the land that is so-called Canada. We acknowledge this fact. The land we serve is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, and the Chippewa. Real World's offices are in Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Hi, my name is Matt Galloway. I'm the host of The Current on CBC Radio, and I'm with Nicholas Davis, who is the 2022 recipient of the Real World Visionary Award, Executive Director of Equity and Inclusion for your public broadcaster. Nikki Davis, congratulations.
Thank you, Matt.
What does this award mean to you?
Being a visionary, I guess it kind of validates some of the kind of crazy ideas I've had my whole life about how this business we work in, how I see it and how I hear it and how I envision it. And I also, I'm a risk taker. I take lots of chances with things. I think that's part of being a visionary, I guess. And I also think that I see the future of this business in a different way than probably most people. And I'm happy to know that there's people who recognize that.
What is your job? I mean, explain what you do in the position that you have right now.
Oh, my job. Well, my job in a nutshell, if I was to describe it, would be that I want everybody who touches the CBC, everybody in whatever capacity, shape, or form, whether it's someone watching our TV shows, someone reading something we do online, somebody who's enjoying our content on radio, uh, whether it's someone who works at CBC, whether it's someone who we do business with, like one of our vendors, that everyone who touches us, whoever they are, has a great experience. Like I just want them to have a good experience, and to do that, means that we have to make sure that the place that we create for them to have that experience has to be an inclusive space or a welcoming space where people feel respected, they feel heard, they feel valued. It feels like the people in that space care about them in a meaningful way. And so I try to create spaces where people can feel that way about their experience of how they touch CBC in whatever capacity they touch us in.
I've worked with you for a long time. For people who don't know your career path, where did that begin? What you're just talking about now, where did that focus begin for you?
That focus probably began for me in earnest, probably when the very first job I had in broadcasting, Matt, and you may not even know this, was I worked on a TV show. This would have been in 1987 or 1988. I was a host of a TV show. It was a multicultural TV show. It was on cable, Rogers Cable 10 broadcasting right across the country. It was produced by a man who worked at TVO at the time. He was a TVO producer. And that program was all about reflecting Canada back to itself. This is back in 1987. It was called Canadian Spectrum, was the name of the program. And I remember when I was asked to do it, it was based on some of the stuff we had done at CHRI. I'd done some talk shows on CHRI, but they were just some stuff we were doing at school. CHRI is York University's. At that time, it was a community station, and we always tried on that show to be as reflective as we could because we felt that there was things that people could learn about other people that they don't know. Open a window into somebody else's world, which would make people. We hoped, and this is not a word I would use today, but at that time we felt that it would make people more tolerant of people who didn't look like them. And I don't like that word today, but at that time, that's what we were trying to do. And so we were trying to open up a window into the other people's world so people could understand them better and that there'd be less of this intolerance and less hatred. And it was a really cool show. I really enjoyed it. We did it for like a year and a half. And that's where it all began, really. That's where, for me, it was like, okay, this is a really good thing to do, is to actually use the platforms of journalism, and at least where I was at there, to help tell other people's stories, or at least to make people see other people in ways they haven't seen them before, so that those people could be respected and treated well, and they could be better understood, so there would be less hate. And so it really started with that program, and that program kind of set my path. And all the journalism I've done after that has always been around, hopefully, educating people about other people's experiences and make sure that those experiences that we learn from them. That mostly we all are pretty much the same in some degree, shape, or form, but we just may get where we need to get to in different ways, and we need to appreciate other people's journeys so that we understand where they're coming from and why, you know, um, just why I might see the world a little bit differently than you. That doesn't make me and you different people in the sense of like understand that we have a same goal sometimes, but we just have to we get there differently. And I thought that work on that show was excellent. We did so many cool interviews with so many interesting people right across the country. It was real fun, and it really opened up my eyes too because I had a very narrow understanding of other cultures at the time as well. Like I didn't have this deep understanding of indigenous people or people with disabilities or people from the LGBTQ plus community. Like I just didn't have those experiences, and I got a lot of those experiences during that year and a half of getting to meet people, understand them, which forced me to do some more research and some learning. And I've been on that journey pretty much ever since. Where I just try and make sure I'm doing all my journalism through a lens of inclusion.
At CBC, what does that look like for you? I mean, from the earliest days at the public broadcaster, where did that kind of fit in?
Well, I started out in sports, and I had an opportunity to pitch ideas and pitch stories that I thought were interesting. And I remember I used to pitch stuff, and people used to think, okay, like that's not a CBC story. And I'm like going, okay, well, why isn't it a CBC story? Well, because and I this phrase used to come up all the time, and I dislike this phrase with a passion. But well, would so and so from Manitoba be interested in that story? And I'd be saying, no, but maybe Kwame in Rexdale might be interested in it. And why aren't we as interested in Kwame's liking our stories as much as we are so and so in Saskatchewan or wherever, right? And so I used to challenge that a lot there, and they were cool. They were open to it in sports, and they're like, it's a good point. And so they allowed me to tell some really cool stories about people from at least my community at the time who were doing really interesting things in the sports world and telling it through the lens and perspective of what it means to be like a Black athlete or what it means to be someone who's advocating on behalf of Black people at that time. And so sports, the people who are running sports at the time just gave me that platform to do it. And we got to tell some really cool stories, and so that's where it started in sports. But what it looks like in current affairs, like when I got over to Metro Morning, was really around whose perspective are we telling stories from? Like, how are we telling those stories, and whose perspectives aren't we hearing from, and why aren't those perspectives at the table, and who's pitching stories, who's telling stories, and really asking myself some pretty deep questions, and I came there with that thinking in mind from the beginning. Wasn't always warmly embraced when I first came over to current affairs, but I really thought that we lived in this city that was really changing at the time, and I really believe that every time I turned on the radio, the radio station of the show I liked and I worked on, it didn't sound like the city I lived in. And so part of my goal is to make it sound that way. And so how do we sound that way? Well, we have to get different perspectives at the table. So the same stories that we would normally cover, but just told through a different lens and through different eyes, through a different perspective. And it must have worked because people started listening, and we got to be really popular station. But we didn't really stop doing agenda stories. We still did the stories of the day because that's what we're supposed to do. Like we're the Metro Morning, the local Toronto morning show. When I get up in the morning, I want to know what the weather's like. I want to know what traffic's like. I want to know what I need to know when I go to the office. What stories am I talking about? Like what are the news of the day? But it's also good to know that we're telling those stories through different perspectives and through different lenses. And I think that's what makes the show or made the show as attractive as it was, and it still is to this day.
What were you up against? You said it wasn't always warmly received. What was the resistance that you faced in that instance that stands out to you?
Well, the biggest resistance was, the people were afraid that we are going to lose our core audience. Like, oh, we're going to lose our core. And I said, well, we don't have a lot of core audience. Like, we're not doing very well in the ratings. We're pretty low in the ratings. How about trying to grow audience? But they thought that in the attempt to grow audience, that somehow we would lose the current audience we had. And I disagreed with that sentiment. And I had a hard time convincing people of that because I wasn't going to like start playing reggae music like 24/7, even though it's my favorite music. You know, that wasn't the plan. The plan was to tell stories from a different lens and different perspectives. So when we had election panels, that we made sure the election panels look like the city of Toronto. We're still going to talk about the election issues. We're going to not talk about them. When we thought about guests, and we make sure our guests are reflective of our audiences. I mean, I had a really great director named Gord Cochran who really, believed in that concept as well. And he kind of held me to it all the time. Like, in the end of the week, he'd go, Nikki, we only had like 2 women on the show this week, and we had only one person from an equity deserving group on the show this week. Like, if you plan to do this, we need to do better. And he would always make sure and remind me. So it was good to have him on board. But the real challenge was convincing people that somehow what we were doing wasn't going to alienate the core. And also, the other thing that people said was that you're dumbing down your journalism. And those kind of things, I think, when you're telling a black man who's been a journalist at this point for around 14 years, that if we invite more people to the tent and have different perspectives at the table, that we're actually dumbing down our journalism. And I mean, there's an article in one of the papers at the time when we first started doing our changes to Metro Morning, and it was called, the headline was Metro Morning, MOURNING, talked about kind of like, the show was coming down to the lowest common denominator, in a nutshell, that we're actually doing poor journalism. And I said, that's not true. Like, it's not. I asked the team, like, do you believe in what we're doing? And they said, yeah, then let's continue to do it. Like, because that's not true. Like, we're not watering down our journalism. We're actually improving our journalism because we have way more choices. Like, we have way more perspectives, way more choices, way more people at the table who are actually making suggestions. How could it be worse? Like, before, we had a very narrow lens in which we were taking stories from. So this is the narrow lens. If we broaden that lens of where we're taking stories from, we have a much wider palette to choose from. How are we going to get worse? Like, we have to get better because we have better choices. And I think in the end, we won so many awards for our journalism, the journalism that we're quote unquote supposedly dumbing down, that, we felt very validated in the work we're doing, and we stayed on our path, and we stayed the course. And having Andy Berry, buy into what we're doing at the time, a 50 something year old white man who believed in that work too, what I mean? And he didn't need too much convincing that this was the direction to go into. And I used to say all the time, and that he didn't like it, but I thought that Metro Morning was a show, of 50-year-old white men talking to other 50-year-old white men about things only 50-year-old white men liked. And he said, well, let's change that. And he understood it needed to change. And so we felt validated, especially when the ratings started to change and when people started to listen more. We won more awards. I thought our journalism improved tenfold, and it improved because we had better choices to make. We didn't have a narrow point, but a huge palette of stories to choose from.
I mean, this is visionary stuff, right? This is like a visionary award. I mean, and you take a look at when that was done. How long ago was that?
It was like 2002, 2003, yeah.
So why do you think, given how successful it was, why do you think people didn't embrace that change before? Not just here, but more broadly.
Well, like, it's funny, change is people hate change, because people think when you're making change that somehow whatever we're gaining from this change is someone else's loss, and nobody wants to lose something. I mean, I've just read this great article about privilege, and how when people have privilege, how they'll do anything to maintain that privilege, even though they might say, no, it's not my fault that this is the system's this way, or that's not, and someone else didn't change it for me, but I'm not going to change it because I didn't have nothing to do. I'm nothing wrong with it. But really, you're not changing it because you're benefiting from it. And so, and I'm saying to people, I say to people like them back in 2003, 2004, I'm saying, listen, I'm not telling you that you're going to lose your job or lose your status. I'm telling you, we're going to make the table bigger. I'm not taking away chairs from the table. The table right now has 4 chairs. I want to add 6, 7, 8 chairs to the table, and we all have the same weight. So it was trying to convince people that no, there's no loss for you. It's a gain. And then you're going to be richer as a journalist too. So the big thing is that people just didn't like change because change is hard. We all know it's hard. 2, we have no idea if it's going to work or not. You know what I mean? So we're afraid of that. But I really think that when you say I'm giving the choice now to these different people, yeah, I think some people took it as that they were losing something, and I thought they were gaining something. They're gaining new perspectives, new way of seeing the world to help us be better journalists. They saw it differently, and so that was a challenge all the time that we had to face, was how do we convince people that this doesn't mean it's not an either or situation. It's, to me, it's like, it's not either this or that. It's no, we're everything. Like diversity means everything. It's white, black, Chinese. It's everything. It's all the different people working. That's diversity to me. And so why would I take away one part of that diversity and then of course narrow then my bandwidth of stories to choose from? I just had to try and get people to get past that it wasn't a lost thing. And it's hard. It's even hard today still to get people to understand that it's not about like us getting better stories isn't me, or getting a wider selection of stories or wider perspectives isn't you losing something. It's us all gaining something. But it's hard for people to see that sometimes.
How much has actually changed, do you think? I mean, that show, and I say this as somebody who was, one of the people who got to sit in one of those chairs that were added to the table, that you added to the table. Um, that show has been a huge success and has really changed the sound of the radio. But broadly, how much has actually changed, do you think?
Oh, geez, not enough. Nowhere near enough. Sometimes when things like that happen, people think it's an anomaly. Like it's just that's just they just got lucky or it's a freak accident. But I think when you take a look at all the work that's happened in radio at CBC, and most of the mandate of almost all the radio shows at CBC is to look and sound like the communities we serve, whatever those communities look and sound like. And I think it's one of the reasons why radio is so successful at CBC in terms of audience share. I mean, because I think every station, at least the majority of them, try their best to look and sound like the communities they serve. And whatever you are, and that community looks different in Winnipeg, St. John's, Montreal, Toronto, they look different. But the fundamental thing of looking like the communities you serve and sounding like the communities you serve and feeling like the communities we serve, I think it lives really strongly in radio. And I think we need to do a way better job of doing it on our other platforms. You know what I mean? Like I think we can do better. We are, I mean, I would say where we are today compared to where we were in 2004, 2005, maybe 2008 when we started really getting into online, it's way better. Like it's way better. We have a better understanding. We have seen audience growth in most of our different platforms, and we've seen it in the way, and we know that growth comes from doing a better job reflecting our audiences back onto themselves. But we have so much farther to go. Like we're not even nowhere near where we need to be. So that's a bit frustrating for me. And then, I always sometimes things happen that you feel like you've taken one step forward and now you're taking two steps backwards, and you kind of got to get back on that train again, or on the horse again, depending on the analogy you want to use. But for me, as long as we're trajecting in the right direction, I'm going to stay and do the work I'm doing. But once we start not trajectory, like a trajectory is not in that positive direction moving forward, then I may need to think about doing something else. You know what I mean? But right now it's moving in the right direction, even though we have some hiccups and bumps along the way, and we hit some valleys sometimes. If you take a look at the trend over the past 10, 8, 5 years, whatever, it's moving in the right direction. So I feel confident I can that about the work I'm doing because of that trajectory. But man, it's there are days when you go, wow, like holy jeez, like we still
What's your biggest challenge now, do you think? I mean, you're in the big job, and so you get to set the vision for for that approach. So what's the big challenge that you face right now? And it's not even just here, but I mean more even broadly across society.
Yeah, well, I can speak for, in my world, one of the biggest challenges is still education and making sure that people understand the work we do and the value of that work we do. It's still, I just still think we need to do some education around that. When I hear people say to me, I had a white man tell me the other day that he has no future at CBC because we're not hiring white people anymore in leadership jobs. And I thought, wow, okay, well, I could show you the hiring stats, and they actually speak the complete opposite of what you're saying. But I understand why that person might feel that way because there's such an emphasis on this work right now at CBC, which I think is a good thing. But the challenge for me is to make people think that we're not, that somehow we're not excluding somebody else. Like part of my whole thing is about inclusion, and I want to make everybody feel included. And I don't feel good when other people feel like they're being excluded. So how do I help educate them that they're actually not being excluded, and that they're actually part of this thing that we're doing and part of this growth that we're having in terms of making CBC a more equitable and a more inclusionary space. And so that's my biggest challenge right now is education and making people understand the value of the work we do. And I'll say this, Matt, I didn't know we have to make the business case in 2022 for diversity and equity and inclusion. I didn't think we have to make that business case, but there is a case to be made that we're not excluding someone in that process. I think people understand the value of work in this space in terms of financially and growing audiences, but I'd hate for it to come at the expense of someone else feeling excluded. And so it's how do I educate them around that? No, they're actually part of this journey. So everyone's part of the journey, and that's the big challenge I have right now. And it's hard. It's really hard. And every day I think about that, and then when I hear things like I heard from that white man, I'm a little disappointed that he feels that way, and I'm hopefully I can educate some people that that's actually not the case.
Do you worry that in society the pendulum swings in different directions, and so the pendulum is kind of out, and when people feel that there's a greater push on inclusion, that some people are being excluded, not just at the CBC, but more broadly in society? Do you
Well,
worry about that?
well, of course, look at the world we live in right now. Like, look what we've gone through in the last 4 or 5 years. Let's talk about from the U.S. elections, right? And how that has kind of impacted people right around the world. Like, and then look at 2000 and like 2020 when the 2020 with George Floyd, right? And how that situation, you know, I mean, ever since then, there's been really great interest in diversity and equity and inclusion and making sure we're doing a better job. And of course, there's people who think that that focus might be too much on that. Like we're focused on that to what some people say to me, at, so much so that we're actually hurting other people. And I
Or
would
that it's existing at a surface level, that it's not getting down to, because there's big money in it, and
oh, of course.
in trying to figure out how to check those boxes. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's the problem for me. It's like, so you've raised such a good point, and there's too many people who are just taking this pendulum swing in this direction to actually benefit from it monetarily or positionally, right? But if we're just checking boxes, then there's no sustainability, and then the pendulum's going to swing right back to where it was before, and it'll sit there for as long again until there's another George Floyd incident or another, we find indigenous burial grounds, right? Like it's going to swing back, and that's the only time. No, we need to get the pendulum up here and have it sustained. And so the work we have to do, and I told my team this, the work we have to do moving forward is how are we doing initiatives that are sustainable, that so that when we leave and when things are back to quote unquote normal, whatever that is, that those initiatives and those things still stay in place to support the people and the equity deserving groups we are meant to support. So how are we nailing down tracks that can't be lifted back up? And what are we doing to do that? Because if we're not building sustainability, and to me, sustainability is that it lives long after I leave. You know what I mean? If we're not building that into it, then I don't want to do it. And so, so some of the things that we're doing now, people say, well, I don't feel it. Well, you're not going to feel it yet because we're trying to do systemic change now. And things are actually going to be there forever. So when Barb's gone, our vice president's gone, or when Catherine, our CEO's gone, and they've put a lot of money and resources into this work, that it just can't be taken away when they're gone, and that they don't exist anymore. Because then the pendulum will swing all the way back down. People talk about the good old days, and I always say, well, who are they good for? Because they weren't good for me. I'll tell you that much. And I don't want that pendulum swinging back down to the days when it wasn't good for me. It needs to be good for everybody. So we need to keep the pendulum up there again, and just educate people on how it's actually benefiting everybody.
What are you proudest of in the work that you've done?
Wow. In this space, well, that's a good question. Oh boy, I wish I looked at. I don't really look at the world that way, but if you make me have to think about it hard, I'm super proud of the work we did at Metro Morning. I'm just super proud of it because, we helped the city, I think, get to know each other better. You know what I mean? And get to understand each other in ways in which we probably wouldn't have happened if we didn't have that program. We were able to get you on as a host full time. Like, I'm super proud of that, because I know it was a monumental thing in the city of Toronto, and I'm super proud of that. I'm proud to say that, yeah, the first Black man who hosted, Metro Morning was under my watch. I'm proud of that. I'm super proud. And then you did us proud by being so great at it, you know what I mean? Which made it even more validating. So, yeah, there's lots of things I'm proud of, Matt. That's probably the most one is the work we did at Metro Morning. And then next to that would be some of the leadership programs that we've created at CBC. We created a program called DEL, Diverse Emerging Leaders Program. It's going into its 6th year right now. Over 100, people from equity deserving groups have gone through that program. And the majority of them have done quite well, in terms of being seen as leaders in this company. And I think I'm very proud of that too, because we're building a pool of leaders where you can't now say we don't have people from equity deserving groups who can lead, because we've built a pool. We've created a pool in-house, and those people have been amazing at helping helping me at least see the future of CBC in a much brighter way.
We all have like voices in the back of our head that kind of urge us along, that hold us to account. And I mean, you're one of those voices. I always think, what would Nikki think? What would Nikki say? In the back of my mind. For better or worse, but usually for better. For you, I mean, who's the voice? Who is it that that you think of when you're doing your work that is going to call you out when tell you what you need to be told, not tell you what you want to be told?
Yeah, it's definitely my Uncle Hopton. As a young kid growing up, my father died when I was young, so we didn't have really a father figure in my life until I was probably 11 or 12 when my uncle came to live with us. And he's a Rastafarian, and he has some real strong spiritual beliefs and real strong principles, and just a really morally strong person. And he used to challenge us every day, me and my brothers, about doing the right thing every day. Like, like you got to do the right thing. And he's always in the back of my head, always. And he lives up in Barrie now. He's super proud of me and my brothers, but he kind of gave us the moral fiber to do the stuff we do, and I think about him every day.
For the young Nick Davis, who thinks that where you are at is unattainable, that path is impossible, what would you say to that person?
Well, we all have imposter syndrome at some point in our lives, and I sit down every day and think I can't even believe I'm in this chair. Like, and then any given day, I assume that I won't be in this chair much longer. But what I say to everyone is that what, if you believe in something strong enough, I know it sounds so hokey, but it's so true. Like if you believe in something strong enough, and you have the work ethic and kind of the discipline to kind of follow that path, and you take guidance from people who are trying to help you and understand what feedback looks like, and not take it personally, but actually use it as a way to grow, you can probably get where you need to get to in life. You know what I mean? And I always say, shoot for the freaking, the moon, and if you catch some stars on the way down, and that's not too bad either. I have real high expectations of myself. I always have. I have high expectations of the people who work for me. And I just think that I try and live up to those expectations. I don't always attain it, but like I said, if you shoot for the stars, the moon, and you hit a couple of stars, that's good too. So it's attainable, but you got to be disciplined. You have to have the great work ethic. You have to take some initiative. You can't be afraid of failing. I failed so many times, it's not even funny. Like, I've messed up so many times. It's how you respond to that, and if you learn from it, that actually kind of sets your path forward. And you got to be willing to take some chances, and you got to be willing to to stand by what you believe in. And I try my best to live by those values every day. And I think if people do that, they can get where they need to get to. But dream big, and believe in yourself. And I believe in myself.
You are one of the best people, and you are. I mean, again, it's like, whose opinion do you respect and do you rely on? And it's Nick Davis, through and through and through. You deserve this award and then some. Congratulations on everything that you've done.
Thank you very much, man.